How to Train Your Murs, written by JUBE514 and SalParadiseLost, read to you by Evie is Evil. Chapter 4. Chapter written by SalParadiseLost. There's no author's notes, but a reader's note. I'm going to say it at the beginning. The recording may have a bit more background noise today because I am currently in the middle of a heat wave, and normally I record with my window closed and fan off, but it is way too hot for me to do that. So I turned my fan down low so you shouldn't hear that, but my window is open. So you're gonna hear noises from outside. Okay, on with the fic. Eventually, the fervored find Jason. They had a naming contest as a team builder. Clark was still salty that his suggestion of Houdini had been laughed at, had died down, and the team had just accepted that Jason was simply not seen at times. They still didn't know how Bruce did it, but at this point, it seemed continuously counterproductive to keep removing him and Dick from the tank to search it through for the 100th time. Luther kept screaming at them to find the pup, but they never did more than pretend to do a thorough search, and mostly let Bruce continue his mysterious parenting. Because they stopped acting like they were going to take Jason away, Bruce got calmer, and began to let them have some limited interactions with the new pup. He always kept a watchful, "I'll bite your hand off if you make a wrong move" pair of eyes, and never let any of them touch him. It was frustrating for researchers, who constantly contacted the aquarium for the chance to study the only captive hatched pup, but Diana refused to let strangers come into their main exhibit area. Bruce only had a tenuous trust in them at the moment, and she wasn't willing to strain it further. Luther could yell at them all he wants. It wasn't like they could exactly force Bruce to show them the pup, and they weren't willing to try. "Kiddos," Clark sang, walking along the edge of the main tank. He was happy to see two dark mops of hair peek up out of the water. Dick was bold, swimming confidently to the edge and greeting Clark with a series of peeps and chirps, his eel tail wagging behind him and his cranial fins bobbing up and down in his excitement. Jason was getting bold too, gaining confidence every day. He didn't come right up to the edge like his brother, but he was drawing ever closer. Clark wasn't dumb, though. He knew there was a very protective father lurking right beneath the surface. "I have some treats for you," he sing-songed, and the pups instantly got more excited. They had both learned the word for treats very quickly. Dick went absolutely ecstatic, his peeps becoming adorable musical trills, and jumping through the water like a little dolphin. Jason mirrored his energy, although more cautious, and added his own cute babbles to the chorus of happy merpup. Clark laughed as he walked along the tank barrier. He unlocked the gate to their small beach area and sat down in the shallows. Water lapped up his waist, and he had to lift his grocery bag to keep it out of the foot-deep water. Dick immediately preyed upon him, wiggling his long, snake-like body towards Clark, more so slithering than swimming because of the shallow depth. Jason kept a little bit of distance. He was small enough to still be able to swim fine in the shallows, but didn't trust Clark enough to plop himself in the human's lap like his brother did. Okay, Clark chuckled when the teenage Mur began warbling plaintively and pushing claws in his shirt to try to leverage himself up to the grocery bag. "I know you want your treat." Dick half sang, half screeched as Clark put a hand in the bag, drew out a whole apple, and then threw it for the pup to race after. Dick darted towards the fruit, a bright blue streak through the water. Then he cast his eyes down to Jason, who was eyeing him warily through the water. When they met gazes, Jason's dorsal spine flared up, and he flashed them at Clark, in what he was sure was supposed to be a terrifying display. The guppy shook his dorsal fins, making them shake in the water and spreading the developing membrane between them. He bared his striped side, arching his back and puffing up like a ferocious kitten. He also had all of the intimidation factors of a kitten. Clark laughed under his breath, trying not to let Jason see and thus discourage his little display. Now that they could get a good look at Jason, they had pinned his Piscean breed down to some kind of lionfish, His pines were adorable now, but Clark could imagine that in the future they could be venomous and beautifully deadly. And big, because if gangly limbs and not yet grown into fins were to be believed as predictors of his growth, Jason would grow up to be a complete leviathan. Clark wouldn't be surprised if he got bigger and heavier than Bruce when he was fully grown. But for now, he was still cute and small, and his little "I'm a big scary fish" war dance was more endearing than intimidating. All right, Clark said with a chuckle, holding up his hands. Jason was still hunched and gave him a little hiss. "You're a terrifying little scamp." He put his hand in the bag and drew out an orange. "Such a scary fish deserves a little reward." He threw the orange, and Jason, after giving him one more precocious flare of his fins, took off after the fruit. It was only after the pups had swum off, set on tearing their new prey apart, that Bruce revealed himself. The large murr calmly rose out of the water, his face blank, but his ear fins perked up in interest. Although he was much more stoic than his bumbling pups, he was just as interested in seeing what treats were in Clark's bag. "I know you want some," Clark whispered, holding out Bruce's favorite fruit, a kiwi, up to the murr to see. "Come here, big guy." Bruce paused for a second, before slowly drifting closer. The water was too shallow for him to truly swim, and he had to maneuver a bit like a seal, but he still made it look somehow regal. The large black murr encircled Clark, his tail long enough to completely surround the human. Most humans would be nervous to be so close to a murr, but Clark remained still and calm, fighting the human urge to startle. He made no fast movements, nothing that could be interpreted as aggressive, and just waited until Bruce settled in the sand next to Clark. When Bruce finally relaxed, Clark passed over the kiwi and watched as Bruce began using one of his razor-sharp claws to begin peeling the furry skin from the fruit. Clark pulled out a pear and his small switchblade to begin cutting it into pieces in his hand. "You know you're not supposed to give them land food," Diana said through a laugh, and Clark heard her start splashing towards them. Bruce calmly looked behind Clark at Diana's approach and gave her a low, grumbling greeting chirp. "Didn't I catch you dangling pepperonis over Dick's head for him to jump up and grab last week?" Diana gave him a small smile, cocking her hip. "No, you did not see that." "Oh, and the 45-minute-long lecture Arthur gave you about the murr's painstakingly balanced diets was just because he felt like it." Clark cut another piece of pear and offered it up. Diana plucked it from his fingers and popped it in her mouth. Bruce, never one to be left out, began grumbling until Clark cut him a piece of pear too. Diana stayed standing, looking out at the pups frolicking in the tank. Dick finished with his apple and seemed to now be trying to steal a piece of the orange from his little brother. Jason was zealously guarding his bounty and snapping at Dick every time he got too close. He was doing the same little war dance he had done at Clark to Dick. The older merpup had seemed about as intimidated as Clark had been. "I have some bad news," she said, turning on the iPad in her hands, in a waterproof case, of course, and handing it down to Clark. Clark passed the fruit bag to Bruce and took the iPad, looking at the news article. The article proudly announced, "It's a boy! The Drake Aquarium successfully hatches the first captive-bred merpup." Clark snorted because apparently Dick and Jason didn't count. He continued reading the article. "The Drake Aquarium is proud to announce that through intense research and extensive experience in mer breeding practice, they are the first aquarium to successfully hatch a fully captive-bred merpup. The pup, named Timothy after the Drake CEO's own son, is a 2-day-old sailfish breed mer that's going to be quite the looker when he grows into his fins. Timothy's parents were specifically chosen due to their strong genetics and caring attitudes. Their partnership was an instant match and one of the great aquarium love stories. Timothy's egg was soon produced after the meeting between the star-crossed lovers, and Janet, Timothy's mother, was put into a nice, calm incubation pool to calmly nurture her egg. Mer females have a bad reputation of being terrible mothers, but Janet could not have been more doting. After incubating her egg internally for 1 month, the egg that would hatch into Timothy was finally laid. Janet was overjoyed along with the employees at Drake Aquarium, and the egg was hatched after 2 months of additional incubation in the aquarium's specialized incubation tank. Timothy was born a healthy little boy, and he is currently under the supervision of his vigilant team of caretakers to ensure his strong growth. Due to the success of this pup, the Drake Aquarium is already planning to set up more breeding pairs and hopefully introduce an entire school of merpups into their main exhibit area for public viewing sometime early next year. Then, following the article, was a series of pictures. First was a female mer circled around an egg and glaring at the camera like she was moments away from striking it. Clark guessed that was the mother, Janet. The second picture showed what Clark presumed was Timothy's hatching. The egg surface was broken, and a pale red fin was poking out. The third picture was almost disturbing. It was a pup lying in the palms of a keeper, who was holding him under the water and smiling at the camera. The pup was limp in her hands, almost looking like a tiny corpse. Its eyes were closed. Its small mouth was open in a tiny O. Its fins were only half-formed, and the pup didn't have any membrane between its spines to make up the iconic sail of its breed. He looked embryotic, like he'd been taken out of his development way too early. "That cannot be a healthy little boy from the article," Clark muttered through a frown, his heart aching as he stared at the merpup in the small tank. It didn't look like it could possibly live more than a couple of weeks. "It is. Luther has been contacting the CEO of Drake Aquarium all day about it." "Why would he be doing that?" Clark asked, and as he did, Bruce nosed at him to look at the iPad. Clark absent-mindedly handed it over, letting the mer swipe through pictures of the pup. "You know Luther," Diana spat. "He always wants to get his hands on the latest and greatest." Clark's eyes widened, and he snapped his head up to look at Diana. "No, he isn't trying to buy it. This pup doesn't look like he will survive the next month." "He can't stand the idea of another aquarium having something he doesn't. But I don't know if the Drakes will go for it. Given the amount of work they put into even hatching the pup, I can't imagine there's a number high enough to tear it out of their grasp." Beside him, Bruce is making a low, sad note, staring down at the picture of Timothy. His face was creased in pity, and he touched the screen delicately, like he was touching the pup itself. "I know, big guy. He's a pretty sad sight. Unfortunately, I don't think there's anything we can do for him." Bruce ignored him and kept murmuring towards the picture of the pup. He didn't stop until his pups returned and whined for more fruit. To be honest, Clark kind of forgot about the Drake's merpup after that day. But who can blame him? He was a busy man. Now that the affection section interactions had grown less popular, Bruce couldn't shake the reputation of being a cannibal dad, despite the multiple press releases the aquarium put out about the fact that Bruce did not eat the egg. Clark had been tasked with developing a new attraction. He had been putting together a small show with the mers. He had thought that maybe the mers wouldn't tolerate it, but it turns out the tick was a natural performer, and more than willing to jump through a hoop if Clark gave him a Fruit Loop for it. "Come on, Dick, uppies," Clark urged, holding a hula hoop about 5 feet above the water. The pup twisted in the water, staring up at the hoop and looking between it and Clark. "Uppies," repeated Clark, shaking the hoop. "I know you can do it, and you'll get a whole bunch of Fruit Loops." The pup's cranial fins perked at the name of the treat, and his tail scrunched, preparing to launch him out of the water. His face creased as he mentally calculated the leap. But then Bruce warbled, low and musical, and Dick's attention snapped in the other direction. The sound meant he wanted Dick to come to him, and it also signaled the end of their training session. The pup tore off in the direction of his dad, and then pulled himself up onto a floating pad to submit to a grooming session. Clark chuckled and dropped the hula hoop. It floated in the water and would be a toy for Dick, or Jason, if he decided to make an appearance. Clark shook off some water, though at this point, with his job, He was used to being more wet than dry, and began to head back towards the staff room. It was after hours for the public, but still about 2 hours before they had all called it a day. They had close-up procedures to get through to settle everyone down for the night. Clark, thankfully, wasn't on an overnight shift today, but he still had to run water quality checks, filter management, and an animal welfare review on all the exhibits in the American waterways and the Caribbean Seas sections. When he got to the staff room, Diana, Arthur, and Hal were huddled over something up against the wall, whispering to themselves.
"What are we looking at?"
Clark questioned, looking beyond them and to whatever they were crowding around. They parted with looks of dismay on their faces. In between them, floating limply in a tank, was a dead merpup. It took Clark a moment to realize that it was the pup from the news article. The one that was supposed to be the healthy baby boy from the Drake Aquarium.
"Oh my God,"
Clark whispered, his stomach turning at the sight of the tiny, still body.
Why is he..."
"Luther purchased it," Arthur mumbled, "but at an absurdly low price. They're practically giving him away because they didn't want the bad publicity of his death being on their hands. If he dies with us, the Drakes can blame us."
"Those..." Clark wanted to curse them, but he lost the word he wanted to say in a growl. The pup in the tank floated, and there was nothing he could say that would change that. His heart ached at the sight of the small body, life taken before he could even open his eyes.
"What are we gonna do?"
he asked, unable to take his eyes off the pup.
"Where are we gonna put the..."
And then the pup twitched, and Clark startled back in shock.
"He's alive!"
He yelped, and miraculously, he saw the ever so slightest twitch in the baby's gills.
"Of course he's alive,"
Hal said with a raised eyebrow.
"Do you really think Luther would just buy a dead body?"
The pup twitched again, its half-formed fins spreading a little bit, before he lost steam and gave up. He was struggling to stay alive. It was so obvious that it seemed cruel to keep forcing him to fight for life.
"He's dying,"
Clark whispered, and everyone nodded.
"What can we do?"
"We don't know," Diana admitted. "He's done a bit better in the small tank. We're monitoring the water parameters and pumping in extra oxygen because he's struggling to breathe, but..." Her face broke, and all the emotions were spread across it plainly.
"I estimate 3 days if we're lucky," Arthur said. "He might not last through the night if we aren't lucky."
"Damn,"
Clark muttered, his hand going to his face.
"So they essentially just shoved him to us so he could die away from home?"
Hal snorted.
Home is putting it kindly. Apparently, his mom wasn't as kind as the article said she was. She was never particularly caring towards him as an egg, and once he hatched, she became absolutely icy. At best, she ignored him. At worst, she shoved him out of her tank and left him exposed on the floor.
"What?"
She was getting more aggressive. He was obviously dying. The Drake Aquarium was ready to just leave him out in the open, to let him die and chalk it up to a tragic accident, Diana said, her arms crossed over her chest. "I was contacted by a grad student," she continued. Madeline Macmillan. She was tasked with Timothy's care, and is the only reason he's lasted as long as he did. She's read about how Bruce was able to care for Dick and Jason. She was hoping he might be able to save Tim. Clark could read the hesitation in her voice, though, and he knew that she didn't think it would work.
"Are you going to?"
"Going to what?"
"Put him in with Bruce."
Diana chewed her lip. "I don't know," she admitted. "Bruce already has 2 pups. I'm not sure how kindly he will take towards a third. Plus, we have no idea about Timothy's history. He could expose our MERS to diseases." Clark stared her down. He knew what was coming next. She glared at him. "I hate when you give me that look." She sighed. "If he survives through the night, we'll try to introduce him to Bruce in the morning. He gets no contact with Dick or Jason, just Bruce, and if Bruce accepts him, we can keep him with Bruce in the back pools till Tim's strong enough for the main exhibit. Timothy proved to be a fighter, and by the next morning, he was still twitching and still clinging on to life. He was stubborn, and as Clark held him to his chest, he felt Tim's heart pulsing. The pup squirmed slightly, eeping into Clark's skin and seemingly trying to burrow into his shirt. He had never held a pup this young before, and given that Dick had already been reaching 100 pounds when Clark first held him, it was hard to believe that pups could ever be this small. Timothy clenched, his fingers not even developed enough to have claws or webbing, closed around the shirt fabric. Then he whimpered, right into Clark's ear. The sound was so small, but it absolutely shattered Clark's heart.
I know, baby,
he whispered, rocking the pup like an infant.
I know it hurts, but hopefully your new daddy will know how to make it feel better.
The pup hushed and nuzzled into Clark's chest with a sad murmur.
Just keep holding on a little longer. I promise everything is going to be all right.
Clark watched as Bruce was offloaded from his marine mammal gurney and deposited onto one of the open-air shallow pools. They typically only used these pools for medical checks, and the Murs were pretty used to being put into them for short times. They knew these pools were only temporary, and that when they went in, they would get weighed and have their fins, scales, and skin checked, but they would be let out within an hour. The trainers had fought to keep these tanks as good, so that the Murs wouldn't fight them if they needed to be quarantined for any reason. And when they were good, they got a treat. Bruce grudgingly went into shallow pool A and idly circled its edge, obviously waiting for their health routine. He was being his usual irritable self, complying but with an exasperated roll of his eyes. Clark briefly wondered who had taught him that behavior. It was only when Diana didn't immediately dart towards the weighing crane did Bruce begin to take a bit more interest in what was going on.
All right, baby cakes,
Clark whispered to the pup, even though the pup didn't understand.
Go give that big old softy your best pair of sad orphan eyes.
Clark slowly stepped forward and came to the edge of the tank. Bruce had ducked underwater, but Clark could see him watching them through keen eyes. Clark was sure the Mur was tensing up. He hated when things went out of routine. Clark cautiously dipped the pup into the pool, trying to ease him in as much as he could. The pup chirped at the new water, squirming and then getting too tired. He sunk, drifting down like one of the dead fish they used to feed the sharks. Inside the tank, Bruce slowly swam, only flicking his tail a tiny bit to propel himself.
Come on, Bruce, he's just a baby,
Clark muttered under his breath as he watched Bruce circle the pup. Inch by inch, the Mur got closer and closer, until he was finally close enough to pick up the pup, cradling the guppy in his arms like an infant. Clark couldn't see his expression, but he imagined this was good. No, this was great. This was exactly what they wanted.
Good job, Bruce. That's exactly what
Clark cut himself off because Bruce was moving again. He was taking the pup away from his body. He was putting the pup back down on the tank floor.
No,
Clark whispered in horror as Bruce backed away and towards the opposite edge of the tank.
No, please, you can't. You're his last hope.
Bruce's arm came out of the water, and he leveraged himself out of the shallow pool. He slid onto the ground and slowly pulled himself across the aquarium floor and back towards his main tank. He undid the latch on the door into his beach area and went inside. Bruce closed the door behind him, and Clark didn't need to know he was sliding back into his main exhibit with Dick and Jason. It only took 5 minutes. 5 minutes, and Bruce was gone. The pup's fate was sealed, and his last chance had been shot. He had been rejected. And that is the end of Chapter 4. Author's notes. I was going to wait a bit more on this chapter, but Jude wanted y'all to scream at me. So I hope you enjoy this chapter and the introduction of Timmy. Reader's notes. I have been a little bit self-conscious since the first chapters went up. I'm like, this is my first mature fic that I'm reading, and I'm like, should I add more trigger warnings? Should I be more like, this is a mature fic at the beginning of every chapter? Like, should I mention that there's... Because this wasn't, like, child death, but it also kind of is. Honestly, guys, tell me, should I just, like, reiterate that this is a mature fic at the beginning of each chapter? And then say trigger warnings if there are any? I feel like I should do that. I'm getting nervous. Anyways, thanks for sitting with me through this heatwave experience. Yippee! I am going home for the summer at some point. So that'll be a new routine of recording. But those aren't going to come out till like July, August. I don't think. But I am thinking of maybe updating my mic. Because I am currently just recording on my phone. So like, what if I got like a proper mic? Because I do have a mic sitting around at home. I have a microphone that I got like in middle school. And I haven't used it since. And I don't know if it'll even work or if it'll even sound good. So like, I'm going to try that. And if it's dookie, I might just get a new mic and see how that works. Because like, I want to have good quality for you guys. And I have realized my audio is quite quiet. Maybe a new mic will do something. Who knows? But podficking, I want to tell you guys, podficking is accessible if you do want to try it. I read off my laptop, and then I have my phone as my mic, and it's sitting on a Fats and Todd plush. And that's my setup. And I just record my room. No muffling or anything. Which you can probably hear my window. But yeah, podficking is quite accessible, and if you guys are interested in trying it, you really should. Don't be scared away. Do it. It's fun. Alright, I think I've yapped enough. Yes, I have yapped enough. Anyways, thank you guys for listening, and bye!